So welcome everyone. Tonight's webinar is supporting your student through academic planning and course registration. We have been presenting this webinar for the last probably 4 or 5 semesters for the purpose of familiarizing parents and family members with the process that students will go through as they register, to inform you so that you know more about what they're doing and what they need to be considering, so you can be a support, a sounding board, and help them without sort of taking over and managing. So I'm happy to have my colleagues from Tulane College Academic Advising, Heather Cooper and Sarah Berger, who will be tonight's panelists. So I'll turn things over to them and I'll join you at the Q&A section.
Thank you, Penny. As Penny mentioned, my name is Heather Cooper. I'm the Associate Director of Student Engagement, and I am excited to be here tonight. The purpose of tonight's webinar is, just as Penny said, it's to make sure that you know what information and framework goes into the advising and registration process and support for your students so that they can make thoughtful decisions during this time. Registration is a time that brings up a lot of different feelings around choice, and this is a moment for all of us to help your students define some of those choices and move forward through the registration process for summer and fall registration that begins in the second week of April. The next slide shows us as our presenters, and that is, of course, myself. Just a quick introduction. I'll let Sarah introduce herself, but my role here currently is a new role where I oversee student engagement, and I oversee the work of advisors and the day-to-day frontline work that we do with your students. But I have worked in advising, it will be 10 years to July, come this July. So I've worked with students at Tulane in an undergraduate advising capacity for over 10 years. And Sarah, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Berger, and I'm one of the college advisors at Tulane College. I've been with NTC advising for just over 2 years now, but I started working with Tulane in their Center for Public Service with the service learning programs and internship programs. I'm really happy to be with you here today, and I hope we'll give you some good information that will be helpful to you and your student moving forward. So just to give you a quick overview of our objectives for the webinar today, we're going to talk a little bit about our advising model at Tulane, to understand the different ways that we do support students through different facets of advising. We'll talk about registration time tickets and timelines, some of the particulars around those. Of course, advisors' role in registration and the registration process, what students' roles and responsibilities are throughout registration, and then how you can support your students. Of course, saving some time at the end to give you some helpful resources and some questions, of course, at the end. So to kick it off, the advising model at Tulane. So we really have a tiered approach to advising at Tulane. And as you can see from this long list, we are here to support your students in a lot of different ways. Academic advising is only the beginning. So we are one of the first points of contact for your student, helping them think through the core curriculum and academic policies and procedures as they start their journey here. As they go on to declare their major and become more specific with their academic interests, they'll also be assigned an advisor that is a faculty member in their department to support them in those types of questions and endeavors. We have pre-professional advising that works with our students that are moving into careers in health and pre-law. Also fellowship advising, career advising, success coaching, peer mentors, and tutors. All advisors work on an appointment basis, and it's up to the student to schedule an appointment when they'd like to meet with their advisors. For NTC advising, we always want to see our students at least once a semester, and I always tell my students I like to see them more often than that. Just great to get to know them and who they are and what their interests are. But at a minimum, we'll see them once each semester to plan out what they've got going on and brainstorm ideas for the future. And next slide, please. So here's a little bit more about the role of academic advising. So when we meet with students, a lot of our conversations are around course selection. So what are the courses that they need to have on their schedule that are going to meet the core curriculum requirements? Also talking about academic planning, so making sure that they're on schedule with the amount of credits and the courses that they need to move forward in a timely way. We're also talking a little bit about major, minor, specialized study options. Again, students do have an assigned faculty advisor as they do declare their majors of study. So we'll be working with them to also identify who that is and seek out those faculty advisors too for those types of specialized questions. We also work with students to navigate changes between majors or schools. You know, we just got finished working with a lot of incoming students that a lot of them mention how much they love the interdisciplinary curriculum at Tulane. And they might have several interests that cross different schools and very different disciplines. So as they're exploring and discovering what their interests are and the direction that they want to go, we are here to support them to make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible. A lot of times that might also be understanding some of the policies and procedures, you know, around making those changes, as well as transfer credit. So transfer credit comes up a lot. Students will, you know, sometimes have transfer credit questions coming in as incoming students, but also if they're taking classes over the summer break or over the winter break, they might have questions about how that's going to appear in their transcript at Tulane. So helping them through those pieces. Also, you know, sometimes there are reasons why students need to withdraw from a course or from an entire semester. And we're here to support them in conjunction with our campus partners, our success team, student success team, and case management. So we're also here to answer those types of questions, and perhaps a leave of absence for something like a study abroad or something to that effect. And then finally, I mentioned that we have pre-professional advising. So for a lot of students that are interested in those pre-health, pre-law tracks, helping them connect with specialized advising that's going to help them be competitive in their applications and plan ahead for what might be post undergraduate Tulane.
All right. So to do all those things, there's the inevitable question is, what resources are available to my student and how can they meet with their advisor? I consider, just so you all know, the advising team a full team. While your student is assigned a specific advisor, I really feel like there are many contact points with advising that doesn't have to be through the specific advisor that they've been assigned. That is one mode of contact for us, but there's also all of these other great resources. So one of the up-to-date websites that we have is advising.tulane.edu/connect. And that shows you a little glimpse on the screen where students can find us in person at certain events that happen, many of which will happen now during registration. We're hosting different events. We're having regular registration events. We'll hand out cookies in the process so they can see that can be a stress-free process. We have some virtual ways to connect with us, including a virtual advisor of the day. And many of our advisors' offer virtual office hours. So all of those things are really important. Then this website also shows you how to make appointments with pre-health and pre-law advising, which is an important support during this time as well. Couple things to remember about making appointments, that students should try to schedule those advising appointments early and ahead of time. We basically have a scheduling system that opens up 2 weeks in advance. So if a student is looking and seeing that there's not as much availability, first I would say that they could open up all of their availability and not try to be too picky about when they meet, and just see what the advisor availability is, but also checking in the morning, because the morning will pull up the next day of availability, and it will become available each morning. So having your student check, and then of course having your student encouraging them to actually make the appointment and show up to the appointment is useful, so they can use that time wisely, because it can be difficult to make another appointment. We usually see students in person or virtually. Our first year students, we really love to lay eyes on. It's really valuable to come into the first year advising appointments with in person, but if they're sick or not feeling well, they can always switch it over to virtual, or of course, if their schedule just is a little too compact to make it work, to come over to Mustapher Hall. If you're not sure who your student's advisor is, that's one way to find out if your student's reading their emails right now, because we do reach out to them quite often with our names at the end of those emails. So if they aren't reading their emails though, and they need a little help navigating or figuring out who to email about what, you can always have them email advising@tulane.edu. You can give our phone a call, 504-865-5798. And Ms. Verna will help to connect you to the advisor who is assigned to the student. Next slide, please. So a couple things to remember that help frame this whole process are some important dates. We are a calendar-driven office. So of course, spring break is coming up from April 1st through the 9th, essentially. Students will be off campus. Again, we are offering virtual appointments during that time, so it doesn't mean your student can't meet with us, but they of course might have to kind of pay attention to their schedule in a different way, since they won't be here on campus in their normal setting. On April 10th, registration will open. What we call this 2 weeks of registration beginning on April 10th, priority registration. That just means that first students with the most credits will register first, and then it will kind of taper down to the students with the least number of registered credits. The assumption there is that people who are closest to graduation will register before the students who are farthest away from graduation. And in that way, those ticket times open every day at different times over a 2-week period, so that everybody has a chance to register during that time. Once that ticket is open and registration is open for your student, their registration will remain open unless later on holds are put in place or things like that. But otherwise, it will remain open all the way through the beginning of the semester. And at that time, they'll even have an add period of 2 weeks at the beginning of the fall semester, should they need to make them. If your student's looking at any summer classes, do keep in mind that the add and drop periods are very short and very slim. So sometimes there's only 1 or 2 days that a student would have to drop a summer class before some of our refund policies come into play. So just keep that in mind. If your student is on the fence about a summer class, they can go ahead and register. But if they want to drop it, or they're thinking about dropping it, they really need to make that decision probably before class begins, ideally, but at least within the first day or two would be the best way to save your money. This semester, after priority registration and kind of everybody's first round and first shot at fall registration and summer registration, will have the last day of classes. They, of course, will have their exam period, May 6th through 11th. And then for our graduating students, we will have commencement on May 20th. So these are just some of our bigger dates that are coming up, but kind of setting the tone for our advising office and our own availability as well. All right, I think this is me as well. Okay, so the priority registration, I kind of explained that already. The schedules are changeable until 2 weeks after the beginning of the semester. The time tickets, I was going to drop in the chat. I don't know if Penny, I have access to do that, but I can also do that during the Q&A. But there is a time ticket schedule if you're curious when your student might actually register or what their time ticket is. First of all, they will know because it's written across the top of their Gibson portal. So you could ask them to look at that. But they also can, there's a registrar website that shows a breakdown of who registers when based on their credit hours. A couple helpful things if you're new to this process to remember. Minimum full time is 12 credits. Students at this point can register up to 12 credits, but once they pass 12 credits, they won't be able to drop below it. So sometimes this means the student's only enrolled in 9 credits or something below part-time. If they have any scholarships or funding or other things that require them to be full-time, which all of our full-time undergraduates should be, unless there's a special circumstance, please remind your student to be sure that they're registered in 12 active credits, meaning they're not just kind of sitting on wait lists and things, which is not registration. That is just holding on. Then at first round of registration, so during those 2 weeks of registration, your student will be able to add up to 17 credits of actual coursework. After that, after everyone's had a chance to register at least once, so after our first year students register after, I think that's April 20th and 21st are the last couple days of registration, usually the Monday after, which I believe is April 24th, everyone will be able to add up to 19 credits. So it's just good to remember if a student's running into any roadblocks for registration that they might need to wait until that later date to add that extra class that they've been thinking about, or just want to like play with their schedule a little bit more above the 17 credit limit that's at the initial line. We talk a lot to students about waitlists during this time. Like I said earlier, waitlist does not mean you're actually registered for a class. You're usually allowed to register for up to be on 3 wait lists at any one time. The system will not let you register for for the same course and then waitlist for a different section of the same course. So if they want this Spanish teacher, but the only one available is this Spanish over here, then they have to register for one of those 2 or waitlist for one of those 2. They won't be able to do both of those things at the same time. So waitlists are first come, first serve. When your student is on a wait list, they will have on their registration page a number that tells them where in line they stand. When they are number 1 on a wait list, they will get an email that says you have 48 hours to register. Unfortunately, missing that email is not a reason to get put into the class later. They'll have to join the wait list after that. So again, kind of staying on top, that usually people get exactly what they need eventually, as long as they kind of keep an eye on their registration and their wait lists. So also, the academic calendar, like I said, has some important dates and deadlines and things like that. Again, referring back to my comments on summer school. Summer school actually has a different set of add and drop periods depending on which course they're taking and when, because there's an early summer, there's a late summer, there's a May-mester, there's a lot of different summer terms. So the deadlines will vary. So I would recommend that your students work with their advisor to make sure that they know exactly where that is on their website. Moving along to the next slide, Sarah, I think you are up.
Okay, it's me. Just to expand a little bit about the advisor's role in registration, because students do work with their advisors leading up to registration and to plan. So it's just to talk a little bit about how that's structured. So one of our main functions as NTC advising is to really make sure that students are completing their core curriculum requirements within those 4 years. And some of those requirements are a little bit more time sensitive than others. The basic requirement, foreign language sometimes takes a few semesters. So with our knowledge, really our depth of knowledge about the core curriculum, helping students complete those requirements in a way that not only fits into what they're trying to accomplish with their majors and minors, but a lot of times really complements what they're actually doing with their majors and minors and their process of exploring what some of those academic interests are. Because the core curriculum covers such a wide variety of what I like to call buckets. So we have things like, we have things like writing and math and foreign language. We also have social science requirements, lab science, historical and textual perspectives. And we really do have hundreds of classes in most cases that will fulfill those requirements. But the class that a student chooses to fulfill that requirement oftentimes can also help them in their journey of figuring out, and narrowing down what they'd like to study. The core curriculum really feeds into that major exploration. And then at the same time, helping students find balance. So if they are, for example, a pre-med student and they're taking on a lab science and a mathematics course, saying, well, maybe you want to keep your STEM courses to, those courses that you already have and balance that out with something that will fulfill your aesthetic and creative arts requirement, something that will speak to your interest in Latin American history. So really helping students use the core curriculum to find balance in their schedule and still moving forward with what they need to do. And so that really feeds into what the course and curriculum recommendations might be. And when we reach the edge of our knowledge, referring to those specialists that might be able to provide more nuanced information to what students are trying to achieve. And I'm thinking really specifically about, and this is can be more relevant to upperclassmen when they start to get into what is going to be fulfilling their electives for their major, or what is recommended for them in terms of research experience. Those are the types of questions that they would be working with their faculty advisors in the major departments, or even working with one of those pre-professional advisors. I if the pre-professional advisors are also so great as students are moving into their second and third year, starting to think about, how do I prepare for the LSAT or the MCAT, and how do I make myself stand out as an applicant. And so when we get to that point in a student's journey, then we can really start to refer out and draw upon the full breadth of that advising model that we touched on earlier, so that students can really take advantage of all that good knowledge and experience. And really, it just kind of speaks to the curricular flexibility that we have, because again, we have these 5 schools. They're very different from each other, yet they all share the same core curriculum. And so if students are able to take advantage of meeting with their advisors on all levels, they can really maximize the time that they're spending in their coursework in a way that's going to, really provide an advantage in a lot of ways. To meet the core requirements, but also to really get into their topics of interest and the goals that they have for themselves post-grad. All right, so we did talk a little bit about how students can connect with advisors. Heather spoke a little bit about the Connect website. So we have a lot of different ways that students can connect with our office. We are a mighty team, and while we do have individual students that we work with, we all come equipped with the same knowledge and expertise. And so while we love to meet our students in person or virtually one-on-one, we also offer walk-in advising. And for some students, that works out really well for them if they have a busy schedule or if they weren't able to schedule an appointment ahead of time. We do encourage students to schedule ahead of time as much as possible. That gives them really the flexibility to schedule an appointment that's going to work for their for their own schedules, because students are busy. They have their classes to manage, they have maybe on-campus jobs, internships, extracurriculars. Especially if they're a planner, it's important for them to also figure out, okay, when is it going to work best for me to really see my advisor, and pick that time, up to 2 weeks ahead. We also, we offer the advisor of the day virtual service, but we're also increasingly offering points of contact across campus where students can find us there. And, if they have one-off questions that they'd like to consult with an advisor about, we have some drop-in sessions at the library, and might have one also at the Student Center coming up next month. So we're trying to keep as many options open as we can for students, just so they know that we are here to support them and help them on their way. All right, and so a little bit about the student role and what they can do to really feel empowered in the registration.
We
Sarah, you're
Knowing the
frozen a
registration
little
time
bit.
ticket.
Oh,
Again,
she's back. You got a little
I'm
frozen
back.
for a second.
Okay. Just with this slide?
Yes, so just start at the beginning of this arrow again.
Sure. So this is a little bit about how students can be the most empowered in their registration process. And that starts with knowing when their time ticket opens. And that information is issued by the registrar's office based on the number of earned credits. So Heather had mentioned this a little earlier, but it's based on earned credits. So our graduating seniors are going to be the first ones to register. And just knowing when that is opening up so you can be ready to go. The next thing is to check for holds. So an example of some common holds might be the Student Health Center. So if there's immunization records that haven't been sent in, there might be a health center hold. Or another common one is accounts receivable. Something going on with tuition, then there might be an accounts receivable hold. So check early to make sure that there aren't any issues there, so that when that time ticket opens, they're ready to go. Another important tool is going to be the degree audit, and that is, as an advisor, a tool that I use in every appointment and that students can access through their Gibson portal. It's essentially a breakdown of every single requirement that they have, and just to see where they are in their degree progress. And they can access that anytime. So that's a very important tool, in addition to the online schedule of classes. So our online schedule has a planner feature where they can kind of play a little bit of Tetris with their classes and see kind of what would fit in well for this and that. And we're always encouraging for students to prepare planners and backup planners. Just because if you don't know if a course is going to fill up ahead of time, having an idea of courses that are going to fulfill that same requirement or that same purpose, but that it can be something as a backup option in your back pocket. You're also going to want to meet, take advantage of your major advisors if you're a declared major, or also consulting with the catalog. Our online catalog is fantastic. If you haven't visited it, it's catalog.tulane.edu, and it breaks down every single program of study that we have at Tulane, which is it's fun to look at because it gives a brief description of each field, and it also lists the courses that are required for each one. But it does include graduate programs. So if you want to filter it down to undergrad, that can be a little bit easier to look at. But that is an important resource, especially if students are still exploring and trying to decide what they'd like to pursue. And then lastly, but maybe most important, register on time and be flexible. Be there at ready to go. If your time ticket is at April 15th at 8 a.m., be there at 8 a.m., even if you're not a morning person. And that's kind of a lot to ask for a student, right? 8 a.m. But, just be there and also be flexible, because the truth of the matter is that we're opening registration in April, but classes don't start until August. And so there are many months, there's a lot of time to get things straightened out if it doesn't look perfect from the get-go. So just keeping in mind that flexible mindset as you're creating a planner and a schedule. I think it's back to you now, Heather.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're an advisor when you get excited about the catalog. So the one way that you might see your student, maybe even over spring break, obsessing over registration is by building multiple planners. So in order to remain flexible in the registration process, it helps to have a number of options at your fingertips. Now, the reality is if your student is an engineering student or a BArch student in the School of Architecture, they might have a very structured curriculum and may not have a lot of flexibility, but they're going to have flexibility in the sections they choose. So while we can't promise that they won't get an 8 a.m. class, we can promise that somebody is going to help them make sure that they get the classes they need to kind of move forward in their curriculum. Sometimes that's us in advising, and sometimes that's their major advisors or somebody specific in the department who can issue overrides for particular classes. But the big thing is to create multiple planners and to kind of plan ahead around the options that they have available to them. There are several months. In this particular fall, we actually have about 5 months before the fall begins. So we have a lot of time to let things settle. If the university or a specific department notice that a class has a lot of demand that was either unexpected or just they weren't quite ready for, then what will often happen is that students will report to the department and the more seats will kind of pop up or another section will be added to the schedule later. So this 4 or 5 month period we have before fall, people will be busy behind the scenes if there really are kind of progress issues going on with the registration. So we've got lots of flexibility though, and I just encourage you to kind of support your student through that, like that today or the first day of registration at 8 a.m. on April 15th or whatever time that they're registering really is just the first time that they're going to register for what's available. And then they can waitlist for a few things and then they can kind of keep adding some options and we can always see them after registration to see how things went. I think we're ready for the next slide. Most majors are pretty flexible, except for some of the ones I mentioned, like engineering or architecture. Business is pretty flexible, but your student might have certain prerequisites that they have to do in a certain timeline. So they might choose which of the prerequisites they do and when, but they do have to kind of finish a certain number of their core classes within the major of business, at least by the end of sophomore year, for example. So business advisors are available over in the business school for those students. Architecture is actually busy building up their advising supports in office. So we do a little work with the students, and students will also work with their architecture advisor if they're higher along or farther along in the curriculum. And then engineering, like I said, is usually more of a puzzle piece. But a lot of your students are doing maybe liberal arts majors or majors that are 10, maybe 15 classes large. So if we think about the arc of an undergraduate experience as being about 8 semesters generally, then we think that most majors are going to take up about 2 spaces per schedule. If we think every semester might be around 5 classes. The way my advising math works is that 15 credits per semester over 8 semesters equals 120 credits, which is the credits required for most of our undergraduate degrees. Some degrees like business are 122 total, and I believe architecture is about 163 for some of the 5-year programs. So they're a little bigger. But besides that, there's a lot of flexibility. So again, it doesn't always matter which communication class they take to stay on track. It's just the fact that they have 1 or 2 communication classes. So if their first choice isn't available the day of registration, they can move to one of the other classes that are available, add those to their schedule for the day of registration, and then waitlist for the preferred class for another date that they can add. That is, yeah, so I think I've mentioned everything here. Many majors contain multiple courses that satisfy requirements. Yeah, so I do want to say, like, there's a lot of questions around this time of like, am I using my time efficiently? And am I checking boxes in an official way? Many of our programs have 4-year plans, but like I said, a lot of them do not. And so students are often actually finishing core curriculum requirements just by doing their major. But of course, if they're a communication major and they haven't taken their lab science and they haven't taken their language classes, then it might be time to get them into advising and make sure that they kind of at least have a plan for those more traditionally difficult classes that take a little more time so they can spread them out. We certainly don't want to take stock of all of our remaining hard classes come senior year. We really want to be able to kind of spread that out over time. All right, next slide, please. So again, kind of going back to summer school and some of the summer planning, there are lots of different programs offered in lots of different ways at Tulane, and even it makes our own head spin. But at the end of the day, there is an NTC summer school office, and Kathy Marks has been leading that charge for the last year, and she's amazing. So they've gotten a wonderful calendar of undergraduate classes available for NTC summer classes, with all of those drop and add deadlines and calendaring things that I mentioned that you might want to keep tabs on. Summer classes have a mixture of in-person and distance learning opportunities. So if your student is definitely going to be home this summer, but would like to take a class that they would normally not take, they can still participate in summer school. Most of our NTC summer terms are 2 5-week sessions, one that runs the course most of June, and one that runs most of July. We do have a 2-week compressed summer's offering called a Maymester. That's a 2-week intensive at the end of May. So your students are welcome to do that. Now, I do want to mention that the registration time for summer classes actually opens at 8 a.m. on April 10th. So the ticket time is the same for every student across the university to take summer classes. So if your student is really thinking they are going to take a class, even if they're not sure, they might want to go ahead and register for the class and then unregister for it, rather than, you know, hope it's available by the time they make their decision. That could be useful for them. The summer programming, there's a bunch of programs that go through the Office of Study Abroad. Many students do those programs. There's a separate application for that you need to find, that the student will need to find on the Summer Study Abroad website. There are service learning opportunities both abroad and within the continental United States, but there are a bunch of great service opportunities where students can go abroad and do different research, and we will work with them when they get back. We have a transfer credit specialist who can help them make sure that they get credit for some of those opportunities if they were outside of Tulane. So just thinking about that, this is a good moment. We do hear from students a lot when they think about fall, also bringing in their questions about summer, because of course, if you're going to take it this summer, then you won't need it in the fall, and we need to know that. All right, I think we're going to the big question: how can you support your student and keep them in the driver's seat at the same time, right? So yes, you can obsessively text them and make sure that they are registering and those types of things, making sure they're waking up for their 8 a.m. time slot. But most of all, it helps because you are their trusted advisor in more ways than we could ever offer, is really just help them reflect on what has been working for them in the classes that they've had and what has not been working for them. So if they love history classes, but they really can't keep up with more than a few papers per semester, maybe sticking to one history class. They really need to do these STEM things because they want to do pre-med or pre-dental and things like that. Again, kind of Sarah mentioned earlier, finding that balance in their schedule. We have to be careful not to undermine our students in that process. When we talk with them, we certainly don't want them to think that we don't think that they can do it, but we want to say, well, what is balance for you? What feels good? What's felt like a little too much? Thinking about things that might take an additional layer of planning. So their summer school ideas, their study abroad ideas. There's lots of programs all across the country that don't have to cost a lot of money. If your student does want to take a summer class and they want to do it online, there's ways to transfer that credit in. So there's also some opportunities for students to get summer school funding for those who might need it. And those applications are actually open now through the Center for Academic Equity and a few other offices on campus. So there's always ways to figure that out. But of course, some of those applications and processes start soon. So they need to just start thinking about where that might fit into their upcoming summer. Get them to the advising website, get them over to one of our events. We've got a 2-hour registration roundup every Tuesday, leading all the way through registration from 4 to 6 on Tuesdays at the tutoring center. We've got one on April 12th in the evening called Midnight Advising from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. So that's just for the craziest advisors among us who really like coffee. And we've got we've also are hosting different events across campus. There's always walk-in advising in addition to the virtual advisor of the day, which we have every day, and we have longer hours during the priority registration period. We also have in-person walk-in hours between 10 and 4 in Mussafer Hall, right in the lobby. So if they're really stressing out during the registration kind of crunch of those couple weeks from April 10th to April 20th, just send them in and they, and somebody will be here to kind of help capture some of that anxiety and help them through it. And just again, reminding your student that this is not the end of the world. We will figure it out. There are going to be classes that are important for them. I've worked here 10 years. I've never seen anybody not graduate because they couldn't register for the class that they needed the day of registration. They generally, with a little persistence, will get exactly what they need. And sometimes the departments will help them out as well if it's that urgent. So they're in good hands. They're not alone. It might feel like it sometime, but they're going to get supported. All right. Few other resources. I feel like we've mentioned a few of these already. Your student can use Gibson to access their degree audit, which, like Sarah said, is basically a report of all of their requirements and their progress toward graduation. The registrar's office gives things like time tickets and sets the academic calendars. Those deadlines and those dates are all posted on the calendar, amongst other places. I think Petty posts them on various websites as well. So that is an important resource for all of you. The classschedule.tulane.edu is where we actually have students, where students actually add and drop classes. Advisors cannot add them to classes. We have zero authority over adding them into classes. We did help them when they initially registered because they didn't have AP credits and things like that in the system, but now they should. So going over the degree audit and things like that, if your student's saying, well, wait, my AP credit's not there, my credits from this program aren't here, those kind of things are important to bring up with an advisor, especially around registration time, because it could mean some sort of block on registration for classes of the upper level. Using that crazy catalog that Sarah was talking about is lots of fun, I agree, and very, very helpful. Students don't have to go blind into this process. They can look and see what classes they need to actually finish or proceed in the program that they're in. The advising website, the academic programs website also shows all the different majors and minors. Keep in mind that the hardest thing and the biggest anxiety producing thing at this time for most of my students is, like I mentioned early on in the presentation, is that kind of conundrum of choice. These students they have a lot of information. We've been rattling off information for the last 40 minutes. So they are having a hard time making choices. So sometimes just that quiet reflection time with you. Hey, what is it that you want today? What is it that you want right now? And then moving through that is really useful. So some of these websites and resources will help with that. And keep in mind that the FERPA, which allows parents to ask specific questions about a student's record or progress in degree and things like that, does have to be signed by a student in order for us to share that. We have records of those and files on hand to just check that we have that. So sometimes if we don't have that on file, we might just have a more general conversation with you, but we're always happy to hear your input if there's specific things happening for your students that would help us work with them. All right, I know we're getting to time and
So,
bring it up to questions. Penny, take it
yes,
away.
so now is the time. You can type in your questions. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can before our time runs out. So I'm just going to start going through those, and if we get closer to the end of our time, I'll try to choose the questions that might have the broadest application to the audience. So the first question is, how long after a student declares a major, for example, in communication, will they receive a faculty advisor from the department?
Yeah, I can answer that. So generally at the moment of declaration, which is just basically a form getting signed, but each department has their own set of steps within that form getting signed, and often in communication, in particular, meeting with somebody in the department, a major advisor, faculty advisor is assigned to the student. So by the time the form comes back to advising and we actually input it to the student record, we're inputting not only that the major is declared, but the actual faculty advisor as well.
The one question is that FERPA release form good for all records at Tulane or only for academic advising issues? And so I can tell you that the student can, one of the FERPA forms has these multiple check boxes. And so a student could, they could grant their, their permission for academic advising to talk with their, family, but not the Office of Student Conduct, or vice versa. So it is for particular offices. So make sure that the student, uses that correctly. Heather, do you want to say anything else about the FERPA release form and record?
Yeah, I think there's a few versions floating around online. There are the most up-to-date ones are probably on our website and the Student Affairs website, in my opinion. But yes, I think that ultimately if the student has checked everything, but then turned it into advising, they would probably have to bring, as far as I understand it, bring copies to each and every office that they would want to grant like FERPA regulation allowances too. So they would need, each office records that separately. We don't have like a universal FERPA system, although once in a while we do call our partner offices and get those kinds of, yes, we have FERPA information available. The student has a form on file for these particular individuals.
Right. And students can rescind that at any time. If they want, to take that release form away, they can, they can do that. So just keep that in mind. So here's another question. And I might make you unhappy in what I'm going to say, but a parent has said, I've noticed in my students' Gibson portal. So here's one thing to just keep in mind, family members. The student is really not supposed to share their access to their Gibson portal with anyone else. That is their username and password should be private, and they should keep that really kind of pure, that they're the only person accessing that, because that access goes to a lot of different systems at Tulane. And we have sometimes had parents accidentally fall for phishing scams because they were accessing the student's email, clicking on things that they thought were important. And so, students kind of learn what to avoid and what to keep careful. So I know you may have looked in their portal and seen some things, but that really is supposed to be their portal, and they're supposed to keep that secure with their login and password. But I'll have our panelists address the question of what are SOPA courses, and is it common that students might take some summer classes in SOPA, which is the School of Professional Advancement. So that's a whole separate entity at Tulane. So I'll let Heather or Sarah address the summer SOPA course question.
I can take a stab at it, and maybe Heather might have something to add, but yes, the School of Professional Advancement is another arm of Tulane, separate from Newcomb Tulane College. And they have programs that are separate, some of which are approved courses and paths of study for Newcomb Tulane students, and some of which are not. However, the SOPA label that you'll see on the schedule of classes, a lot of times is actually a marker for SOPA students to understand that that's a course that they can access as SOPA students. So it's not necessarily there as a flag for NTC students. Anything that you would add there, Heather?
No, I mean, that's exactly right. The part that says SOPA is really just a billing marker for those students who are in more part-time evening programs or extension programs, and who there's certain sections that are allowed to be taken by them at the rate and at the pace that they take them at. It doesn't really mean anything to your full-time undergraduate student.
So another question is, where can a student find a list of courses that fulfill the Tier 1 service learning requirement?
I can take that one too. So while oftentimes you can filter courses in the schedule of classes, my go-to reference point for service learning courses is the Center for Public Service website, which is the center on campus that administers the service learning requirement. And that's where you'll find information not only about service learning courses, but also about service-based internships, service learning international programs, and other ways that students can fulfill their service learning requirement. And that's just cps.tulane.edu. And they will typically release an Airtable of courses with a lot of information, maybe more than you can find in the schedule of classes, things like which community partner organization the course will be working with, and things like that.
In the course listings, what number of courses are considered graduate level? Is it 4,000 or 6,000? Are the 1,000 to 3,000 levels recommended for sophomores, generally speaking?
Yeah, so our numbering system begins at the 1,000 level and moves all the way up to 4,000 level for undergraduates. 6,000 levels generally are for graduate students, and 7,000 levels are as well. I usually see 7,000 more in like the law school and the med school programming. There are ways to filter out graduate classes to just focus a student on undergraduate coursework in the schedule of classes. If we had another hour, we can spend some time driving around that fun tool. But the ultimate is, yes, there are 6,000 levels that are graduate student classes, but there's are actually mixed classes in some ways, and many curriculums 4,000 and 6,000 levels are cross-listed. So there's a section with some graduate students, and the same section would also have undergraduates. 4,000 levels, I do generally see more juniors and seniors taking those courses, and they have a higher number of prerequisites. 1 to 3,000 levels are fine for most first-year students, definitely sophomore students, and then, you know, some of my juniors and seniors will be taking stuff at the 3,000 level. 1,000 levels are really broad, so as a student moves on, they have enough knowledge about, you know, the undergraduate foundations to really probably get more engagement from those upper level classes.
So the next question is, can the SOPA courses, the School of Professional Advancement courses, fulfill a core curriculum requirement for a Newcomb Tulane College student?
They can, and there are some caveats that we're actually trying to work out to get more clear on the schedule of classes, but essentially there are a few classes, again, this is not the ones that just say SOPA in the little box on the schedule, but classes from departments that are offered through the School of Professional Advancement. Classes like education classes are certain. We have digital design classes. We have some information technology classes, homeland security, kinesiology. Those classes are from departments that are run out of the School of Professional Advancement. So any class that your student takes in those areas is considered non-NTC, outside Newcomb Tulane College. They're limited right now to 9 credits of coursework outside Newcomb Tulane College. So they can take a little SOPA class here and there. They could take an undergraduate law class. There's only a few offered every year, but sometimes there are, and they can take some social work classes, but all of those can't go over 9 credits without getting above the number of credits that will count toward your student's undergraduate degree. Back to your question though, a couple of them do carry core curriculum requirements. So things like the Intro to Education class, which is Education in Diverse Society, has service learning for first tier service. And I believe the course itself also carries race and inclusion. So that actual combination is completely fine. They just can't continue taking a bunch of education classes unless they're going to focus in on one of the minors that are available to them through SOPA.
The next question is, my student does not have an advisor due to staff turnover. How can she schedule an appointment with an advisor?
The fun fact for your student is that they can actually probably register for an appointment with any advisor, but there are a couple of advisors that just left at the end of last week. I emailed all of your students this week to tell them that new advisor's on the way, and we've gotten that all worked out and squared away, and actually plan to reassign these students who to some of our experienced advising staff already here. So we're actually working on that project right now, and your students should get an introductory email in the next day or two. So I would suggest that they reach out to me if they really need an urgent meeting in the next day or two, or something's happening in their current semester. But if they could just hold tight for another 48 hours, then they'll have a schedule that they can access they can meet their new advisor.
The next question is, it looks like the Maymester classes aren't listed yet. How do students make a decision by the time they return from break? Is it just that it's hard to find, that you need a different pathway to find the Maymester classes?
So they're listed on the summerschool.com website. I don't think that's the actual website, summerschool.tulane.edu website. But they're also, in fact, if you were in the schedule of classes, classschedule.tulane.edu, and you choose, I think it says part of term. I'll double check. But if we first, in the upper right-hand corner of anything on the schedule of classes, you actually have to change the term from fall, which is the current default, to summer. So you would want to have them look at summer classes. And then within summer, they can choose part of term, which is essentially allows you to select the classes that are just for Maymester. And when you select Maymester, you can then look at classes. However, you kind of need to choose a particular type of class. So if your student knows what subject matter they're looking at, they can look at anthropology and see which anthropology classes are available during the Maymester. I think the easier is the summer school, and I'll drop that in the chat or on the answer page for you in just a second.
Okay, we'll go on to the next question while you're adding that reference. So can students who need placement tests, such as language placement tests, take them now? Will they need department approval to register if they're missing a prerequisite? So I think those might be two questions. The prerequisite question may not be about language. If that person who typed that in, maybe type in a clarification for us, but let me just repeat that to our panelists. Can students who need placement tests, such as for languages, take them now? Will they need department approval to register if they're missing a prereq?
Yes, I can take that one. So we absolutely encourage students to take their language placement test as soon as possible. We ask students to take language placement tests as they're entering Tulane in their very first semester, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time to schedule the placement test and for them to be placed into a level of language. So if they're starting a foreign language from the beginning, if they've never say they're studying French and they've never studied French, they would just register for the first level of that language. But it's funny that I picked French as an example. French is one of the departments where you self-place. So if you have taken X number of years of French, you would register for X level. But many of them, including Spanish, Mandarin, German, Italian, you would need to take a placement test. And yes, you should take that as a student as soon as you can, just so that you do register for the appropriate level.
And so the person clarified that, will they need department approval to register if they place into a higher language?
Yes. So what happens is when the student takes a placement test for a language, that information is entered into our student record system, and it allows them to register for the appropriate level based on their results.
And they should do that now, because that will be something that's going to be hard to get a turnaround time for a placement within the week of registration. That certainly would be something, a good way to prepare, if they haven't already. We usually try to get students to do this in the summer prior to the beginning school in the fall. But if your language isn't kind of hot on their minds, and they might have decided to wait, and now's a good time to definitely prompt them to do this if they're interested in a language that they've already have experience with.
Okay, we are reaching the end of our time, so I'm going to ask one last question that's been submitted, and you may have already kind of answered this somewhat earlier. Are the summer courses listed in multiple places? Where can we find all summer courses available at Tulane this summer? The ones I've seen are just for the SLAM program, Environmental Studies, Public Policy, and Native American Studies. Those are those special summer programs that are offered by some of the different academic schools. And so I think, Heather, you gave enough description of how to use the settings in the schedule of classes to sort and filter things to find those classes.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to use use a schedule of classes and just look at the summer 2023 term, and then look at the areas of interest that your student may have. Let's say they want to take care of their formal reasoning requirement this summer. They can look at the formal reasoning options and just search that. You can't just look at the whole list. And actually, I thought we had a whole list, but I wasn't seeing it when I was just looking at it. So maybe Penny, if I find a better, more comprehensive list, I can get that to you after our call today.
Okay.
But for now, I think surfing the schedule of classes is the best way to do it. And that's the way I do it with my students in the office.
Okay. And so parents, I will also just say that I am collecting some information about summer school that I will put in a future parent e-newsletter. I'll try to get as much of that in the April 1st parent e-newsletter, or it might go out on April 3rd, since that'll be the Monday. So, so also watch for that information. And then I will send everyone who registered, whether you attended tonight or not, a follow-up email. So the panelists will send me some of those things they've mentioned. And I'll include that in that follow-up message to you. So think that we have to close now. I guess there's one question about a math class that Heather is answering. So again, if you have a moment to capture this QR code and submit a quick, answers to a quick survey, it'll be helpful for our panelists to know what, how valuable you found this webinar. If you want to type in a quick comment into the questions before we close, you can do that. We hope that this has been helpful so that you feel more able to support your student, empower them to make good decisions, utilize these resources well, and make really great plans for their future coursework. And I will just say that you're also welcome to email families@tulane.edu if you have further feedback, if you think of something later, or if you have a suggestion for a future topic you would like to see. A lot of the things that you might like about what we're offering through family programs may have been suggested by some other parents years ago. So we're always open to that feedback, and we appreciate your comments and your input. So Heather or Sarah, do you have anything else to add at this point?
Just thank you for having us. And I wanted to make a quick note that this QR code is the link to make an appointment with advising. And the next slide is a feedback QR code for the webinar.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so here you go.
And
So
while you're filling out your survey, I did remember that I just asked I told an advisor as I was walking down the hall that I was going to be meeting with you all tonight. And she said, tell them to tell their students to give us details in their emails when they email us. So, hi, Ms. Cooper, what do I need to take next fall is not going to get answered as quickly as, Hi, Miss Cooper. This is Shane Donovan, ID number such and such, majoring in such and such. I'm looking at these particular classes for my next semester. I'm a rising junior. That's going to be a little bit more easy for us to kind of answer and frame and really get to remember that our advisors are working with, in some cases, nearly 400 students per advisor. And that is, so we can answer your students and our goal is 48 hours, but it's definitely helpful if they give us some information. I also tell my students, look, if you haven't heard from me in about 72 hours, don't feel bad about emailing me again. Sitting for weeks and saying I never got a response, I understand, but get on the top of my list, and I promise I'll get back to you. So just kind of be gracious with us in our emails, but feel free to prod us again if it's been 72 hours, business hours, since the last email. So those
I
are
do think that's one of the most helpful things that families, parents can do with your students is to coach them on sort of being more businesslike in their email communication. Because sometimes they do just give these really sort of very vague kind of questions. They don't put a subject line in the email, they're just still kind of learning how to use email more efficiently and effectively. So if you're talking with them and you're hearing them bounce some things around, you might say, so how do you want to frame that in the email so you can make it the easiest thing possible for your advisor to give you a really concrete answer back. So I think that's something that you can apply your wisdom and experience to in coaching your students. That's just one of those things that can be really helpful. So we hope you have found the webinar tonight helpful, and we appreciate your participation tonight and your support of your student always. We know that you're a big influence on your student and that we are all in this together and wanting your student to be successful and have a really positive experience at Tulane and get the most out of their education. So we're grateful for your partnership in this with us. So I hope everybody has a great evening. And again, we'll send you this information in email. Give me a few days to get everything turned around. And thanks again. Good night, everyone.
Thanks all.